and welcome to the Peas and Quiet podcast. On this podcast, we discuss all things gardening, including growing veggies and flowers and how to create your dream backyard alongside nature. My name is Robin. I'm an environmental scientist turned full-time flower farmer and gardener, and I'll be your host for this podcast. In today's episode, we're chatting all about autumn in the garden and some of the garden jobs that we can start to work on as we approach the cooler months of the year. From compost to harvesting to living seasonally, we chat all about the things that are happening in our gardens as the cooler weather approaches and some of the jobs that we can slowly start to work on throughout the months of autumn. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge traditional owners of country throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connection to the land, waters and communities. We pay our respects to elders past and present and thank them for protecting our lands, coastlines and ecosystems. I hope you enjoy today's episode. Welcome to episode 2 of the Peas and Quiet podcast. We're back with another solo episode this week. And before we begin chatting about today's topic, I wanted to say a massive thank you for everyone who listened to the last episode. I received so many lovely comments and just lovely comments both on the YouTube video that I posted, because I posted it on my main YouTube channel, The Nature Patch, and I also just shared it on Instagram and that kind of thing and got so many lovely comments from you all. So I just wanted to say a massive thank you for that. And yeah, I'm really excited to be back to be recording another episode. Today we're going to be talking about autumn and autumn jobs in the garden, which is something that has been on my mind for the last few weeks as we transition out of the warmer months of the year and head into the cooler months of the year. So I wanted to just share some things that I'm doing in the garden and give a few ideas of just some of the jobs that you can work on over the next few weeks to just help the transition between the warmer months and the cooler months, because there's a few things that I think that are important in the garden to do now so that you are a little bit ahead for when the cooler weather arrives. Now, Australia is such a big country, as you all know. There are so many different climates that we have and so many different microclimates. So what autumn feels like to you may be completely different to another person. The majority of the population here lives in more of a temperate or subtropic environment, but I think it's important just to touch on all of the different climates in Australia. I don't personally have experience growing in all of them, but I will try to involve all of the different climates in this conversation today, because I think it's just important to do that and not just talk about a temperate or subtropic environment where I have experience growing, but just touch on a few of the other climates as well. Most of these things that we're going to be talking about as autumn jobs in the garden are very broad and can be done wherever, and how I would approach this is to work on these jobs when it suits your climate the best and the right time to do so. So for me right now, I haven't really been feeling a lot of the cooler weather. I mean, some of the plants are starting to show that autumn is approaching and they're getting a little bit tired and kind of finishing up with fruiting and maybe getting a little bit diseased, but then other plants are still thriving and flourishing and don't seem to be touched by any of the cooler nights that we've been having or less sunny days as well. We're having a lot less sunlight at the moment, which is the main thing that I'm probably recognizing in our garden. And obviously when I wake up in the morning, the sun is much lower than it was in summer. But I do know for people in the north of Australia living up there, this is now coming into the time when you are going to be pretty busy in the garden. My parents still live in northern Queensland, and I know my mum is super excited to actually start gardening now because it has been such a hot and humid summer up there. I know a lot of people can relate to this. Even down here on the south coast of New South Wales, the days have been so humid, but I do know up north that it has been really challenging to grow food over summer unless you have a really shaded area and one that has really good airflow. It's something we'll touch on in this podcast about just the fact that you can get diseases when there is so much humidity in the air and that your plant can be more susceptible to disease. And I do know that that's been a really big problem for people growing food and just trying to grow plants. So that's something I just wanted to touch on, that I recognize it has been such a difficult time to grow. But now is your chance as the weather starts to cool down to start growing a little bit more food in both northern Australia and also in a lot of the subtropics. Like I know Brisbane, where I used to live, has also been having a very humid and hot summer. So I'm sure you're all very excited to come into the cooler months of the year. So today I have about 10 or so really broad jobs that you can start to do as we come into the cooler months of the year, and I'm kind of titling this episode Autumn Jobs to Work On in the Garden, and I'm going to chat through them all and just talk about some things that I'm doing in my garden. And if you are stuck on things to do this weekend, maybe this will inspire you to get out in your garden and work on a few of these to make your life a little bit easier in autumn and winter. I've definitely spoken about a lot of these points on some of my YouTube videos and also on the previous podcast that I was on the Earthly Roots podcast, but we're going to chat through a few of them. Some will overlap, but I just feel like it's good to come back and refresh our minds to get a few ideas for what you can work on in autumn in the garden. So we'll get into the first job that I have on my list, and this is really not going to be a surprise to anyone who knows me or watches my YouTube channel or follows me on Instagram or anything, but the first one is to start making some compost. You all know I love a good compost pile. I love anything to do with compost. I think it is one of the most fascinating and underrated things that we can do to just reduce our impact on the environment, and just to make something that is actual gold for the garden, that is made up just of scraps and things that we would otherwise discard, whether that is your kitchen scraps or your neighbor's kitchen scraps or your garden waste. Whatever you've got that's organic and can slowly break down over time can be composted. I'm a big advocate of making compost, and I think coming into the cooler months of the year is the most perfect time to start if you don't already have a compost system. Or if you do have a compost system, then it's a great time to start topping your systems up, giving them a turn, adding some water, maybe some other micronutrients that the compost might need, checking on your worm farms, making sure they're all running really healthy. Now is a really good time to do that. We have quite a few different composting systems in our garden. We firstly have our worm farms, and we have about 5 of these. I think about 1 or 2 of them I paid full price for, and the rest I just got from Facebook Marketplace. One of them I got for free, and then the other ones were about like $20 or so. I think one of them was completely full with worms and compost when I picked it up, and the other one was completely empty. But what I'm trying to say is they're really cheap. You can find them on Facebook Marketplace, or you can make your own if you can't find any or you're low on budget. You can always make your own using either some buckets or some plastic containers. There's so many good tutorials online on how to make your own worm farms. But yes, I have about 5 of those. 2 of them we just used for our kitchen scraps, and just a few little flower scraps that I have from when I'm making my bouquets. And the other ones, we actually compost a lot of the cat waste. So I know a lot of people are disgusted at the thought of composting pet waste, but it is one of the most hygienic ways to do it if you do it correctly. I don't personally want to be chucking a lot of my pet waste in the bin. When I lived in Brisbane in the city, I had a few people who, when we lived in a townhouse, people were kind of, disposing their pet waste in just little bags and putting them in the bin. And it was honestly one of the most disgusting smells that I had to deal with pretty much every day when I would go down to put our bins out, which were next to all of the other bins. It was just disgusting. So if you can, I would highly recommend finding some other alternatives to disposing of pet waste if you can. I know a lot of people also just will flush it down the toilet as well. Sorry if you're eating or you don't want to listen to this stuff. We'll get on to another topic very soon. But we have kitty litter that kind of expands. So putting too much kitty litter down the toilet is just not really a good option for us. So popping them in a worm farm is the best option. And I've showed so many times on my channel just what the end product looks like. It looks like soil. It doesn't smell at all. The main thing you want to do when you compost anything really that has a high nitrogen component, which manure, any kind of manure will have, is to just put a lot of carbon on top. So I mix in a lot of either cardboard or sugarcane mulch into these worm farms, and it ends up being a really great system to dispose of that. And then I use those worm castings not anywhere near any of the food that we grow. I use it either around fruit trees or the flowers where we're not actually growing anything that's edible down there, or around some native plants that I plant in the garden. I know a lot of people do this now and a lot of people have success with it. So it's something that I really like to do, and it just makes my life so much easier. We also have another compost system where we just have these big compost bins that you can get from Bunnings. They are open on the base and then they have a lid, and I put all of our kitchen scraps in there and a lot of other garden scraps that I will take from the garden when I'm like pruning or weeding. All of this goes into these compost bins, and I do try and stir them when I can remember. When I can remember, I will try and add a little bit of air to them using like a little compost stirrer that I have. But to be honest, I do get a bit lazy with these, and it ends up just piling up until I get to the top of the bin and it's completely full. I put the lid on, I leave it for a few months, and then it's a bit easier to turn and add a little bit more air into the bin because everything has kind of compacted down a little bit and there's less volume, I suppose. These bins do have a lot of worms in them as well because the bottom is open to the ground, so worms can freely move in and out, and you'll probably start to see a little bit more worm activity in autumn, and that's just because a lot of worms, they really don't like high temperatures. You won't find them moving up into the middle and the top of the bin in the height of summer, but coming into autumn now, they'll actually move through the bin a lot more, and you might start to see things decomposing a lot quicker. In summer, you will see a lot of decomposition, but I find in autumn when you're creating compost, you get a much better quality end product, I find, because the worms have a little bit more time to move through the whole mixture. I find you end up with a little bit more bulk of the compost, and same as in winter as well, because you're getting that cold composting process versus that really hot composting process, which usually happens in summer. The difference between cold and hot composting is really in the name and about the temperature that the compost actually gets to. And we'll do another episode all on compost because it's me and I have to do that. But I'm a big fan of cold composting because the process happens just a little bit slower. You get a little bit more of the material and it's just better quality in my opinion. We are also starting a new composting system really soon. Scott and I have got some pallets and we are going to set up probably just a 2-bay system for now. We might add a third one on, but we probably over the next few days we're going to be working on that to set that up, because as we do come into autumn, I am changing out a lot of the crops in the flower farm. So I'm ending up with a lot of material and leftover stems and just plant material. So I've been really wanting to make this pallet composting system, which is again really simple and is going to be an open cold composting system where I'm going to basically just pile all of my garden scraps and things from the flower farm and pile them up really high so that the middle can start to get to the temperature where it can start to break down, and then leave it for a while and then turn it into the second bay to make sure that everything that's on the bottom of the compost pile can then be on the top and the material can just decompose a little bit easier. I've always wanted to create a little pallet system, so I'm very excited for that. But yes, I had to get my compost chat out of the way because I love compost, and I think it's just the best time as you finish up with a lot of plants in the garden to start a compost pile. You really don't even need a compost bin or a worm farm or pallets or anything. You could just create a pile on the ground. Just pop some cardboard down if you have grass and start piling up your organic matter. Give it a turn. Make sure it has some water and a good amount of carbon if you're adding just greens and plants and kitchen scraps and things like that. And then you'll have some compost to use come spring and summertime at the end of the year. Right, moving on to the second job that I'm actually working on right now in my garden, and that is to just work on building garden beds or top dressing existing beds for your next round of crops. So whatever kind of gardening style that you like to use, I use a lot of no-dig styles where I'm not actually digging up a lot of the soil. I'm just top dressing the beds with compost and manure and fertilizer and mulch. That's how I prefer to work. I don't actually have a tiller or any kind of machine that tills up the soil, and at the moment, it's not something that I really need. Maybe in the future, if we expand the flower farm, I might look into it, but I really like my process at the moment. And I am almost ready to actually empty one of my compost bins that has been sitting over summer because I have a few, and I'm going to use that to top dress a lot of the flower farm beds and my cottage garden, just to give everything a really good feed. In summer, a lot of your plants are really growing quickly and produce a lot of a harvest. So things like tomatoes and cucumbers and zucchini and pumpkins, capsicums, even some greens. A lot of summer veg uses a lot of nutrients, and if you pull those plants out once they're finished harvesting and you have your harvest, you've got all of your tomatoes, all of your cucumbers, you take the plant out, you're technically just leaving the soil depleted of the nutrients that it used to grow that plant and to grow all of your beautiful tomatoes and cucumbers. So like in nature, it's important if you do take, it's important to give back. So when you're pulling out the plants, it's important to give back in terms of adding a little bit more fertilizer, adding some more nutrients back into the soil to make sure that the next round of crops has enough nutrients. Over summer, one of the main nutrients that is uptaken is nitrogen. So adding a little bit more nitrogen over the winter months is going to be really beneficial, particularly for crops like all of your brassicas. Broccoli, cauliflower, cabbages are going to really benefit from a boost in nitrogen. And same with potassium as well. So if you can find some kind of fertilizer, preferably organic, that has all of your NPK, your nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, to include those three nutrients is going to be beneficial because that's what plants need to survive. You'll also need a lot of other micronutrients and trace minerals that your soil might be deficient in, but that's totally up to you if you want to do a soil test to see what you might be lacking. But if you're not interested in that, then just making sure that you've got your NPK, your nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, just to give your plants a boost for the next few months. My favorite fertilizers to use are usually just like Blood and Bone. It's got all of the nutrients that plants need, and it's made from a lot of byproduct from the meat industry. I'm also a big fan of using the Charlie Carp brand, which actually removes the European carp, which is a pest in Australia, from our waterways and turns it into a fertilizer for your garden. And they make a really great liquid feed that I use on a lot of my plants. I also use worm castings, which is just the best thing that you can use in my opinion, because it's a really slow release fertilizer for your plants. Or I will dilute some in some water and add that when I plant my seedlings. It's really great for adding to small plants because the worm castings, the liquid that comes out from it, actually doesn't burn your plants because it's not really concentrated in terms of those fertilizers, but it does have available nutrients that the plant can slowly uptake over time, rather than some of these other fertilizers, which are kind of like a quick feed for your plants. So yes, that's what I am doing at the moment. I'm also top dressing a lot of my beds with horse manure. I like to use this because it's usually a pretty fluffy manure, if that makes sense. It adds a lot of good organic matter to the soil and breaks it up and just adds in what I need for my soil, because we have really clay soil. So I'm always looking for bulk manure that I can add to my soil. And there are quite a lot of horse paddocks around in the area, so I go and pick some of that up. I haven't had a problem in terms of any potential chemical residue that may be in some of these. I know that's a really big problem, and I think it's important to just test out manures before you use them. But yes, that's what I have also been using on my garden beds. Something else that I have started to work on is to start all of my cool flowers and my bulbs and all of the winter veg. I chatted in my previous episode about what I'm planting in terms of veggies for winter, and I think next episode or the episode after, I'm going to do one all about cool flowers and what they are, what I'm growing, and why you should be planting them right now. But yes, that is something that I would also recommend thinking about. I actually recently got my order for all of my ranunculus and anemones, so get onto that if you are a flower farmer or interested in growing your own flowers. Now's a good time to place your order for those, because I know quite a lot of them do sell out very quickly. We don't have the best options in Australia in terms of variety of these flowers, like bulbs and tulips, ranunculus, anemones, all of those beautiful spring bulbs. I'm not saying that the providers that we do have aren't good. They are fantastic, and I am so glad that we do have some. There are some beautiful varieties, but we are very limited in terms of what we can grow compared to the Northern Hemisphere. And I know there's not a lot of climates that can grow these flowers successfully. Like I can't grow tulips here, so it's something that I don't buy. It's just not cold enough here, so unfortunately I can't enjoy them, even though they are one of my favorite flowers. And if I could find some local tulips, I would definitely be buying myself a bunch of them because I love them so much. But they just don't work here. They don't enjoy the climate. But the ranunculus and anemones, they do really well here. So I have placed my order and I got them in the mail the other day, which is really exciting. And I'm going to hopefully not have to buy any more, but I always end up starting them and then thinking that I want more, but I really don't need any more. I have a few hundred of each of them, and we're just going to stop at that for this year, I think, because last year the ranunculus did really, really bad and just got powdery mildew, and it was pretty horrible. So I didn't really have a good time with them, even though they're one of my favorite flowers. So yes, starting your cool flowers, all your cool annuals that can handle frost, and also getting your bulbs right now is a really important job to do if you want flowers for winter and early spring. Number 4 is maintaining your plants as best as you can as the weather changes. You've honestly got a few choices when autumn comes in terms of what you want to do with your plants. And this goes for anywhere in Australia, really. This is not just for my climate. This will depend on when your cool weather starts to arrive, whether it is now or in a few months. Just, take all of this and apply it to your own climate. But something that I am deciding right now is whether I want to keep some of my plants that are looking a bit sad and get like maybe a few more zucchini out of them, a few more tomatoes, or just pull them out now and get ready to plant something else in their place. This just depends on how productive you want to be with your space. Say if you're like a market gardener or wanting as much produce as you want from your space, you'll ideally be just removing the plants when they start to look really sick, rather than putting a lot of your time and effort into dealing with diseases and keeping the plant alive for a little bit longer. You'll want to pull the plant out and replace it with another plant and crop so that you get a earlier crop sooner. But if you just have a home garden and you want to enjoy a little bit more of the harvest and prolong the death of your plant, then maybe you might want to start looking and identifying some of the problems that your plant is dealing with and work on your own home remedies, or find some remedies to help out with what your plant might be dealing with. We all get a little bit tired and a little bit cranky, and your plants are probably feeling that right now. So one thing that I'm definitely starting to see is powdery mildew in the garden. It's been a big thing. I've chatted about it quite a lot, but it's just the problem that I'm dealing with most in my garden. And if I am in my area here with the humidity that I've been having, I know quite a lot of other people are probably also dealing with powdery mildew. You might start to see powdery mildew or downy mildew over the next few weeks / month or so, and they're both fungal diseases. Powdery mildew thrives on really warm and dry climates, meaning that it's not raining a lot, but it also needs high humidity. You might start to see this on your zucchini, pumpkin, melons. It can even impact tomatoes, fruit trees, sunflowers, grapes even, carrots and beans. What I got from some of my research. And it'll start to kind of look like powdery little white grey spots on the leaves, which will eventually kind of travel throughout the plant. With powdery mildew, you can definitely prevent and control the spread of it by just making sure, firstly, that your plants are thinned out, so you're not planting really close together, and that each plant has good airflow around the base of it. You can also just start removing some of the leaves. So I've been doing this with my zucchini plant, just removing the sad looking leaves. Also making sure that you've planted the plant in the correct space. Obviously, this is difficult to move if your plant is actually growing zucchini, but just when you do plant zucchini, and not just zucchini, but everything that may be related to powdery mildew, just making sure that as the sun moves and gets lower in the sky, that you are making sure that you've planted it in a spot that does get good sunlight in the cooler months as well. Having good sunlight is going to be really important. Also to just make sure that the leaves dry off in the morning if you might have dew around your area. And if that doesn't work, you can also just use organic fungicides. I've been using neem oil, and that's been really successful, just diluting that in a spray bottle of water. Or you can make your own. There's a lot of home remedies out there. I know you can use like potassium bicarbonate with water and spray that on the leaves. And there's other alternatives to that as well, if you just do a quick Google to figure out what you've got in terms of ingredients and what you might be able to use for a home remedy. You might also find downy mildew may occur. I haven't personally seen a lot of this in my garden, but it can also occur in like warm and wet weather, which it's a little bit different to powdery mildew in that it kind of starts on the undersides of the leaf, and you'll see brown, yellowy, like oily spots on the leaves, and that can spread to the whole plant. And downy mildew is a little bit harder to control and can really kill your plant if it takes over pretty quickly. I know this is a really big problem with grapevines, and when I was doing my research, I found this was a really big problem because grapes are such a big crop in a lot of states of Australia, and that downy mildew can be a big problem. So it's kind of listed on a lot of government websites about this disease and that it can be a really big problem for farmers. So yeah, if you are starting to grow grapes, it might be something to look into. I don't personally grow them, but I would love to try one day. So yeah, it's something that I want to keep an eye out for. The next thing that I'm working on is just clearing out the garden beds, but also in a way that leaves habitat for wildlife around. I really discourage just clearing all of your garden and starting over. There's so much life and biodiversity that can even be living in just a few square meters of a garden, even just if you're on a balcony and you have like 5 pot plants or something like that, or you have some small fruit trees, or you're growing like 1 meter square garden beds. Clearing out all of that at once is still going to have an impact on all of the different bugs, soil bacteria that you've grown and tended to, potential birds that may have been visiting to feed off different bugs, and yeah, all of the pollinators that might rely on your vegetation that you've grown for habitat, for food, for shelter on your balcony. Same goes if you have a large garden and you have large areas. Taking out all of your crops at once is going to leave a really big hole for wildlife. And so I would just kind of encourage you to slowly change up your garden if you're thinking about doing a whole refresh of your garden, to maybe just do 1 bed at a time or half a bed here and there to slowly transition your garden and to just make sure you're not disturbing your soil ecosystem that you have built and worked on. And that also the pollinators and native wildlife around can also just adjust to the change as well. There's so many different bugs and birds that you're not going to see throughout your day, because I doubt you are in your garden 24/7. But I know in my garden, for, like the 1 or 2 hours I'm out there at a time, I do see a lot of activity, and I would hate for all of that to go away and all of the hard work that I've put into creating these permaculture spaces to be gone if I removed it all and then had nothing to replace it with and just left everything bare for a while. So it's something just to keep in mind, no matter how small or big your garden is, just to slowly transition when you are thinking about planting new crops for the new season. The next one is collecting seeds from your plants, and I would really encourage you to at least try to collect seeds from one of the plants that you're growing. If you're growing annuals, it's the best way to collect seeds, and I would recommend just choosing the one that you enjoy the most, and that's also fairly easy to collect seeds from. Just making sure that whatever you're collecting seeds from, that it is either like an heirloom variety or open pollinated, meaning that the plant can kind of be fertilized by different pollinators around, but that seed should produce the same plant the following year. You might get some crosses of different colors or fruits. I know I've had some weird and wacky pumpkin varieties grow before, and tomatoes and zinnias as well. Zinnias are really fun to collect seeds from because the flower that you usually get is pretty similar, but usually there's just something different to it, like some different colors in the center of the petals or the different size of the zinnia. And I really loved doing this with the few that I have, because I grow a rainbow of colors of zinnias. Sometimes it's nice to just collect some and then have a little random mix that I can plant in the garden. Dahlias is another really fun one to collect seeds from, and is something that I'm going to be doing this year. And also any veggies that you like. So I usually collect tomato seeds and cucumber seeds, and maybe some zucchini seeds are probably my go-to ones that I can collect. And this is mainly because they're really easy to do so. I don't have to think about it too much. I don't need any like sieving equipment to separate all of the chaff and the seeds. And yeah, it's just a really simple process to collect some of these seeds. And then I don't need to rely on purchasing more for next year. And often they are more resilient to my climate because they've been grown year after year in the same area, rather than seeds that may have been grown like in Brisbane or Western Australia or Tasmania, where the climate is completely different. I would love to know if you are collecting seeds this year. So if you're watching the YouTube video of this, or you can send me an Instagram message, please let me know what kind of seeds you are saving this year. It's one of my favorite things to swap seeds with people. And I mean, I have a lot of seeds and veggie seeds and flower seeds in my little seed storing containers, but it's still one of my favorite things to just rummage through and find something to plant. I don't think anyone can have enough. Maybe they can, but it's something I love to do. And I'm always giving away seeds and plants and things like that anyway. Number 7 is to make your own fertilizer. And this is something I've done before, whether it is comfrey tea or weed tea. That is the weeds from the garden that I'm talking about. There's so many ways that you can make your own fertilizer that can then be applied when you're planting or doing all of the other steps that we've spoken about. This can be as simple as, after you have finished weeding your garden, putting those weeds into a bucket, filling it up with water, leaving it for 1 or 2 weeks, straining those weeds, hopefully getting some weeds that don't actually have seeds on them, and then using that mixture to dilute in water and to fertilize your trees, your fruit trees, any deciduous plants that might start changing their leaves, or anything around the garden that needs some more fertilizer. Comfrey tea is another one that is really great to make, just because the leaves have so much nutrients in them, and it's something that I'm going to probably do this weekend. I think I might make some comfrey tea. You can aerate this. I know a lot of people do that, but to be honest, just stick it in a bucket and give it a few stirs each day, or even just once a day, and you'll end up with a pretty much the same product. Aerating compost teas is a massive topic and maybe a little bit controversial, but I do think a little bit of it is overrated. I think we can go into so many different ways to garden and to make it the most perfect way to create a compost tea and then to add fertilizer to your garden. Or we can just focus on how to make some things that are really simple and easy to use. And then if you really enjoy doing it, you can look into aerating things and having little filters in there to create more microbial activity. But I guarantee you will have the majority of the microbial activity that people talk about when you do fill up a bucket of water and add in some kind of plant material into that. It was definitely quite popular like a year or 2 ago to make aerated compost teas, and it's something I'd like to look a little bit more into. Because I know it has been very popular on some YouTube channels, and I'm not saying that it doesn't work and that it isn't beneficial at all, because it absolutely is, but it can be very overwhelming to do those extra steps. So just keep it simple for yourself and make some simple fertilizer. You can use whatever garden scraps you have in the garden, and if you want to aerate it later, you can, but it's not a necessity is what I'm trying to say. Another job to work on is to plant some trees and perennials. It is a really good time right now as the sun just becomes a little less harsh in all of Australia, really. We get a little bit of a reprieve from our sun and our really harsh UV that we do have throughout summer. And yeah, get some plants and some perennials in the ground. They're much more likely to establish good root systems over autumn than they are in the middle of summer. So if you've got some plants that you have either propagated or you want to do a little nursery trip, I definitely would love to do one very soon, and to just do some shopping and get a few different trees that I have my eye on and get them in the ground. It's also just easier to be gardening and digging holes when the weather isn't super hot, and your plants will definitely thank you by doing that in the cooler months of the year, when they are a little bit less stressed and can just establish themselves a lot better. The second last topic that I have, and I know this has been a little bit of a longer episode, but I am just really passionate on just chatting about gardening. Obviously, this is a gardening podcast, but also just what you can do in the garden in autumn because it is my favorite season. And this is one of my favorite points that I wanted to chat about, and that is just to enjoy the harvest that you have and make your own traditions. This doesn't even have to be the harvest from your garden. It could just be whatever is in season in your local farm shops or what's growing around you at the moment, and make it special and make it memorable and really just appreciate this time of the year and the abundance that we are surrounded with at the moment. I am really excited to do things like attend local festivals, go to pick your own farms. I'm about to go probably in the next month or so, go up to the chestnut farm that we have nearby and go and pick some chestnuts and just really try and get into the spirit of living seasonally. And we really don't need to subscribe to like the European version of what seasonal living looks like or what seasons look like in the Northern Hemisphere, because I live in Australia and it is completely different. The times of the year are completely opposite right now. And to be honest, I do go through a little bit of FOMO when I do see all of the beautiful autumnal festivals and decorations that people have in the Northern Hemisphere. And I feel like we don't really do that down here for autumn, despite a lot of the similar things happening. There are so many things happening in nature around us that we can learn from and develop our own like seasonal calendars. I have been trying to get a little bit more in tune with what the birds are doing around me right now, trying to observe their patterns and just what all of the pollinators are doing in the garden, also how I feel. I start to really have my creative side come out in autumn and the little bit of the witchy side as well. I know a lot of you can relate when I will just want to start to just be in nature a little bit more, be in tune with how I feel. And also just do some of the cozy things that I love to do. Like I absolutely love baking. It is one of my favorite things to do. And I really just don't want to do that in summer. The last thing I want to do is turn the oven on. But as we come into the cooler months, I'm very excited for it. I say coming into the cooler months because I still don't feel like it is that cool. And I haven't really had too much of a desire to do that yet. However, around me, there are still so many things that are in season, and like a lot of the stone fruit that we've been getting in, all of the tomatoes and the cucumbers, and some of those things I haven't really wanted to start preserving and like making jams and that kind of thing. So the best thing that you can do is just start freezing things. It's the best way I think you can preserve. And then if you want to use that to make something else like sauces or tomato paste or something like that, when you do feel a bit more comfortable to do some cooking, then you can pull it out and do that then. Then you can take it out of the freezer and work on it then. But for now, I just want to relax a little bit more and not have to worry about that. So I am finding that I'm just freezing a lot of the produce that we are either buying from our farm stores or from the produce that comes from the garden. So yes, what I was trying to say with this point is really that we don't really need to subscribe to the typical pumpkin spice latte vibe, although I do think they're actually really delicious. But instead, just make your own traditions. Go out and do things that are seasonal for your climate that you live in. And whether that is, you're actually able to go outside now because it's not super hot and you can start to enjoy nature a little bit more, which I know my parents have been saying they are super excited to not have the aircon on and actually have a bit more fresh air because it has been so hot in northern Queensland. Whatever it is, start to make your own traditions and really embrace seasonal living. I think it is one of the most rewarding things that I've started to try and do, and really, really does make me happy. The last point that I have on here is to just reflect on what's been working this last season so that you can come back at the end of these cooler months and start to plan and to work on your garden to make it better and more productive than it was before. just taking the time to slow down a little bit, give yourself a break. Don't worry about if your garden is looking a little bit sad and a little bit run down, because you're probably also feeling that after this summer season of gardening, to just have a little bit of a break. I've really liked to just create some notes. And whether you want to write or paint or however you want to document, just take photos, whatever works for you. Reflect on what you've documented or try and remember how the season's gone so that you can use that knowledge for the following seasons. I really hope you enjoyed listening just to a few garden jobs that you might want to complete in autumn. There's so much to do at this time of the year in the garden, and I'm super excited to hear about what you've been up to. So please do leave me a comment, whether it's on YouTube or over on Instagram. I do have an Instagram for the podcast. It's just the Peas and Quiet podcast, and you can find that through my other Instagram page, The Nature Patch, as well. I'll try and have a post up there that links the two together. I'm hoping that I either kept you company on your drive to work or drive home, or if you were doing some work in the garden or just some work around the house. I am so glad that I could keep you company. I really hope you enjoyed listening to this episode. And yeah, I just want to say thank you again for all of your lovely support and kind comments that I have received. It really does help me so much just to overcome the mental barriers that I have around this podcast a little bit, just because this is something that I'm working on myself. And honestly, content creation and creating all these things is very lonely, and it does get, just a little bit lonely sometimes. So I do love reading all of your comments and actually knowing that you are listening to this podcast and that you do enjoy it. And if there's anything that I can do to improve or topics that you'd like to see, again, I would love any of your feedback. I'm more than happy to change things up or talk about different things or make the episodes shorter or whatever you would like. Please do let me know and I can work on that, because this podcast is truly for you and for hopefully you to get something out of. I'm really hoping to line up a few guests for this podcast. So again, if there's anyone you would like me to chat to, please do let me know, and I will ask them very nicely if they would want to join the podcast and have a little bit of a chat about gardening. But I think I'm going to wrap up today's episode. I really hope you enjoyed listening. I'm going to go and finish my cup of tea that I've been sipping on, and it's actually got really dark outside right now. We are having a little bit of some rain pass through, which is so beautiful and so lovely. We really need it, and the garden really does need a bit of a drink. So this is a very nice, cozy, I'm going to say autumnal afternoon. So I'm going to go finish my tea, go read my book, and have a relaxing afternoon. I hope you are having a lovely, relaxing day wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. And until my next one, happy gardening, everyone. Bye.